This is the You Ask, the Pros Answer podcast. Do you have questions about an upcoming exterior contracting project? We've got answers. Welcome to the You Ask, the Pros Answer podcast. Welcome to the You Ask, the Pros Answer podcast. Your questions answered by the pros you trust. My name is Cole, and today I am joined by my co-host and friend, Aaron Rogers. Aaron, how are you doing today?
I am wonderful, but cold.
Yeah, it's
chipper.
It's real chilly here. I know we were just talking off air or off mic. Here in Northern Kentucky, we got about a foot of snow last week. How much did you guys end up getting last week?
So depending on who you ask, and whether a man measured or a woman measured.
What's your deck measurement? That's kind of like the go-to for a lot of people.
Yeah, so I would say we got 11 inches here in Milton. I know other places got a little bit more. Some places got a little bit less. But I think overall the consensus is anywhere between 10 and 12 inches. So we're going to average that out at 11 inches.
All right. Yeah, that's pretty significant for
Southern Delaware. That's a good snow.
I think it was 3 or 4 years ago when we were living there, it was a borderline blizzard. I remember the kids playing out in the backyard, like giant snow drifts. They dug tunnels through and stuff.
Oh, it was brutal. Yeah, there's been in the last say 20 years, there's been 2 times I think we've gotten like almost 2 feet of snow. Which again, I've born and raised here. We never got that. Even getting 6 inches when I was growing up was almost like unheard of. Yeah. It was huge. So. The one thing I miss is I grew up on a private road. It was nothing but my father's family. So, we pretty much had the availability to go sledding up and down the road all day long without issue. So definitely miss that. Just pulling the sled behind the truck it's always a good time. So.
Yeah. I guess I should say Happy New Year to you and to everybody watching. We did have an episode last week, but it was just a best of, so a bunch of clips. So this is our first time with a new episode in the new year, 2025. That's bonkers.
Welcome back and looking forward to season 2.
Yeah, me too. Longtime listeners know that each week we try to tackle a question that we've been asked by one of our customers or a question that we've had as a homeowner as well. Today we're going to do the same thing, kicking off the new year with kind of Pro Exteriors bread and butter. But to give everybody a little hint, although if you're watching this or reading, you're not reading this. If you're watching this or listening to this, you've seen the title. It always cracks me up when people on podcasts try to hide a special guest that they have. And it's like, we've read the title where it says today's guest.
Right.
Anyway, I'm going to ask you a trivia question to foreshadow what our conversation is going to be today. I consider you an expert, probably the guy that I know who knows the most about this topic, but I want to really test your knowledge here. When do you think roofs were initially invented? What's the earliest record of a roof? I mean, you just kind of take it for granted that people have just always had a roof. But at some point, it was a new concept.
That's a really odd trivia question.
Yeah. And there's an answer. I mean, there's an answer for everything if you search hard enough.
Man.
I'll give you a hint.
Go for it. I'd love a hint.
It is BC, and it's a big number. I don't even know how they come up with this, but
and it's a big number. I don't know. That's such a random question. And I'm trying to think, like, so are you talking about roof products? Or are you talking about like the first time somebody was like, that's a roof?
The first time somebody was like, man, it would probably be a lot nicer if we covered ourselves with something to not get rained on or snowed on or
10,000 BC.
You're heading in the right direction. 40,000 BC in Siberia is the earliest evidence. Now, this is according to Google's Gemini. Okay, so apparently they were people were taking mammoth skins and covering their little huts. Anyway,
and they called it a roof.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
3000 BC, clay tiles were used in China. 100 BC, clay tiles were adopted by the Romans.
Interesting.
It wasn't until the 20th century that asphalt shingles became popular.
Yeah.
And we kind of think of that as like the standard fare in roofs these days.
Yep.
Yeah, 40,000 BC. You can use that next time you're on a sales call. Be like, do you know how long roofers have been at it?
Yeah. I feel like we should put that on the Reddit page. I feel like that'd get quite a few comments. Holy.
I was going to tell you some woolly mammoth puns just to kind of connect the dots, but the ones I'm reading are really, really, really terrible. Like I don't think there's even one that's worth.
Woolly mammoth puns.
Oh my gosh. Because they were using woolly mammoth skins. Yep, I'm closing out of that tab. It's terrible. Okay. Here's what I want to do today. I'm going to ask you this question. How do you replace a roof? And then you're going to tell me. And by the end of this, I'm going to head out. There's a house across the street that's being built and they don't have a roof yet. And so I'm just going to go do it. And that's probably a terrible idea. Actually, audience, the point of this episode is to give you an overview idea of what goes into roofing installation. We're not expecting you to be able to go out to Home Depot or Lowe's, buy the materials, and go do this. We're not suggesting you go do this yourself. But let's just have a kind of a quick conversation. How do you replace a roof? Let's take it from roof replacement. So this is not a new build.
Okay.
All right. Where do you start?
Oof. So step one would be to protect the surrounding home, whether it's landscaping, siding, windows, screens, decks, moving furniture away from the house. Obviously, you're putting a couple 1,000 pounds worth of material up there. Well, all that material's got to come back off. So step one is always basically to assess the current conditions around the property, protect anything that needs to be protecting, move whatever needs to be moved, and then move into actually putting in like your plywood gussets or tarps, whatever you use to protect your building. Everybody kind of does things a little bit differently. There's so many products on the market nowadays that tarps are kind of the old-fashioned way. Nowadays, the equipter is kind of the normal. So,
is each project kind of assessed ahead of time to figure out what unique challenges, what landscaping,
for sure,
balconies, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. 1 story, 2 story, the pitch of the roof also kind of factors in. Things that are a lower pitch, the material you're tearing off will sit there. Higher the pitch, as you're tearing it off, all that material wants to slide off the roof. If the existing gutters are in good condition and aren't being replaced, there's times where we may pull the existing gutters in order to maintain them, keep them safe and from any damage. Sometimes we'll screw 2x into the bottom of the roof to kind of have a little stopgap there. But yeah, every single house is different. There's no 2 houses realistically that are same. 1-story ranchers that are just kind of an up and over. You got a front roof and a back roof. Those are the easiest by far. They're typically always going to be a walkable pitch. They're typically going to be the easiest to manage the debris coming on and off the roof. But yeah, so every roof could be 100% different. Whether or not you can access the rear, if you're using the equipter, sometimes we don't have access to the rear if you have fences and stuff where we can't get the machines in there. We've been on properties that had, $100,000 pool and patios and built-in, barbecue grills and things like that, where, all of that stuff has to be protected. Sometimes it's as easy as throwing a tarp over it if you're really only looking at like granules falling on it. Mm-hmm. But if there's the opportunity for actual material to fall on those things, they have to be protected. Pools are the worst because you essentially have to put a tarp over the entire pool. It's not always the most convenient. But if you get one roofing nail that goes into a pool, in ground or above ground, one roofing nail can essentially rip the liner and cause thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage. So So yeah, so a lot of it, a lot of protection, a lot of you know preparedness goes into the day of. So
Yeah, that to be honest with you, that's not even something I had given much thought to because
yeah.
that doesn't seem like the exciting part of
Oh,
the
it's definitely not the part
project.
that people love. It could be, like I said, a one story up and over rancher could take you 10 minutes to set up your protection, to set your tarps up, to kind of move furniture and stuff out of the way. We've worked on some houses where it's been 2 hours of prep work before a shingle ever gets ripped off, and that's moving furniture, that's protecting landscaping. People discount the fact that if you have landscaping that's 10, 12 feet out from your
Mm,
foundation, and we can't really get close. All of that has to be worked around. So there's guys that don't really care, and the material comes off regardless of what you have underneath of it. If your landscaping gets destroyed, it doesn't really matter to them. And then there's guys where like we want to replace your roof and make it look like we were never there. So
yeah.
um, sometimes we've had situations where the only way to truly manage the material is to have a guy at the bottom of the roof, and his only job is as you tear it off, he puts it on his shoulder, walks to the other side of the roof, and throws it off.
Mm,
That's terribly expensive because that guy literally can't move. As long as you're tearing that material off, he's got to stand there. You get a bigger roof that's kind of cut up, you may have multiple guys. That's all they have to do, stand at the bottom of the roof and manage that material. So yeah, it's a pain.
I know that our crews are conscientious. Our Josh, our project coordinator, he gives a lot of thought to that. But if a
Yeah.
homeowner has a specific concern,
Mm-hmm.
like they know their property better than we do, who
Correct.
should they communicate that to?
So the salesperson is usually the person that kind of we walk through.
Hmm.
Especially if somebody has something that's kind of near and dear to them, and they want to specifically point that thing out. I want to make sure that this isn't touched. This has no issues. When you guys leave, I don't want a leaf off of this plant or
Right.
tree. Or the salesperson is definitely the person to point that out, because everything that you talk to them about gets put into a report, and that report gets given to the crews, it gets given to the managers. Everybody within the company has access to it, so that when the day that we show up, we want to make sure that anything that is of higher value, whether it's dollar amount or emotional value, we want to make sure that that's protected. So definitely tell your salesperson. So
And our salespeople, I think sometimes people think that somebody that's doing the selling, that's all they know is the selling. Our guys know, they go through very similar training to our roofing crews. I mean, they sit through the same trainings, right? They have a knowledge of the
I
procedures and
mean, yeah. So your hands-on guys, obviously, they're installing the product every day. So hands-on training, they go through way more than anybody else. Um, the actual training, the nitty-gritty, like the details of products, the installation of those products, the specs of those products, what they can be and cannot be used for. I would say sales guys probably go through more of that than the actual field guys.
mm,
Simply because we're the ones that have to sell this stuff. We're the ones that need to be able to tell somebody like, hey, I know you want this product, but your house doesn't have the specifics to get this product installed.
yeah.
Um, one of the things we deal with a lot is people installing products on pitches that they're not allowed. So, like for instance, asphalt shingles can be installed down to a 212 pitch. We've seen shingles installed on roofs that are almost flat. I know that old school ways was to just basically drop the reveal of the shingle instead of being a 5.5 inch reveal. They would drop the reveal down to like say a 3 or 4 inch, and it would increase the overlap of every shingle, and they thought that that would handle it. And sometimes it worked. I'm not going to say it is a sure way to make a roof leak. Sometimes it worked, but the manufacturer doesn't allow that. So
Yeah.
there's times where we have people that say, I just want to replace it with shingles, and we have to be the ones that were like, that can't happen. So our guys definitely do a ridiculous amount of training. We do hands-on training with our guys. They are on our job sites quite often to physically see the installation part. We have a mock roof here set up at the office that we do hands-on training at least once a year, as well as we do travel out of town probably once or twice a year to do hands-on training offsite.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of training. So.
All right. Once the property is protected, what's the next step?
So once it's protected, then you're going to start removing the existing conditions. So depending on what the roofing material is, depends on how it comes off. Shingles obviously are black. Asphalt, started with tar, so everything they touch, it's going to have a black streak on it. So they're also very heavy. So you're going to start stripping that material off. Usually you're going to do it, one or two facets at a time to get that completely clear, and then you jump onto the next facet. But yeah, so get it off as quickly as you can. Things like metal roofing, sometimes we will take off an existing metal roof. That's a little bit more, how do I say this properly? That's a little bit more of a selective process, because you can kind of start with a panel, you unscrew the panel, and kind of hand it down to the person down on the ground. You're not really throwing that off the roof.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's
not
a
so
little bit
much
easier
demo
to
day
process.
then. It's more of a
Yeah, that's more surgical, because you can specifically start in one section, unscrew it, and then you have one piece of material at a time versus little chunks.
Yep.
Yeah. We have done some shingles roofs over the year that were installed very, very poorly. They weren't that old, so they were still stuck to each other, but they were nailed high. So when we went to go remove the material, we were essentially ripping off. Imagine like pulling up an entire room of carpet at a time. So all the shingles were still stuck to each other. All the nails were pulling out because it was the middle of the summer. And by the time we got done pulling it, we're having fun because we're like, oh, this is the easiest, removal ever. And then you get done and you have this 400-pound mass of shingles that you now have to figure out how to get off the roof. So although it's fun and it makes great content, if you go on TikTok or YouTube, you'll see a ton of guys that are like, check out how bad this install was. But then you have to take that large chunk of asphalt and get it off the roof somehow, which is very rarely ever going to be done without causing injury or damage. So, but yeah.
All right. After the, obviously we're making this sound simple. This is a dirty and noisy process. If you're home during
Very
the day
dirty.
of your roof replacement, don't be afraid of hearing tons of noise going on.
Yep. Yeah, it's by no means a quiet or clean process. It's very dirty. It's very loud. And the guys that are on that roof, sometimes, we can be loud as well. It's not always a fun job. I can remember when I was still working on the roof, a good radio and a couple of guys next to you that you could kind of josh around with each other all day. And that made the day go by a little faster, especially during demo time, because that was the worst part of the entire process.
Well, it's no different than surgeons in an operating room, listening to Led Zeppelin or something. The only difference is that you're not knocked out during your roof replacement.
It's true.
Everybody, no matter what industry you're in, you want to listen to some music and put your head down and do your job.
Yep.
All right. So let's not pretend. In this process, all the shingles are off, all the underlayments off. What's next?
So then it becomes the inspection process. So now that you have everything off, you want to go around and inspect all of your conditions. Conditions can be, is the plywood nailed properly? Do we have any existing moisture issues? Is there any plywood rot? Is there any framing rot? We as a company, for the most part, replace flashing on every single roof. But if you're not replacing flashing, this is the time where you would inspect the existing flashing to see if it's salvageable or not.
Okay.
If it is salvageable, then you don't really have to do anything. If it's not salvageable, then you have to replace it. You're going to look at all your pipes. You want to make sure that your pipes you should be able to grab your pipes, your penetrations, and basically pull on them. They shouldn't move. If you grab your pipe and you go like this and the pipe moves up and down, then your pipe needs to be secured in the attic. But yeah, so basically you're going around and every little piece of detail work on that house, you're going to inspect prior to covering it up. So this could mean no repairs need to be made, or this could mean, multiple sheets of plywood, some framing. We've had some pretty rough jobs over the years where the roof looked like it was pretty decent. And then you take the shingles off and almost the entire roof has to have new plywood on there. This always comes down to the argument of which plywood is better. CDX is basically like huge thin sheets of wood that kind of get laminated over each other, and then OSB is like basically chips of wood kind of glued and compressed. I personally like OSB over CDX. CDX delaminates. People don't realize that over time CDX will delaminate simply because of heat. It doesn't have to get wet in order to delaminate. So we've torn off roofs before that had no leaks whatsoever, but all of the plywood was ruined because it was old and there was, excessive heat in the attic space. And then it had to be completely replaced. So, which brings me to another thing. As well as inspecting all those conditions, you're also going to look at the ventilation at this time. You want to make sure that you have a proper cutout along your ridge vents. Make sure any area that doesn't currently have ventilation, like where roofs kind of die into walls, you want to make sure that you have box vents or something cut out and ready for install for the new roof. So,
who's making the call if pieces are salvageable or not?
So we pretty much always have a site super on jobs. The only time he's really not there is if jump out to grab materials real quick or happens to run something to a job that's nearby. We pretty much don't really like him to leave ever. Our crews know what we expect. They've been our crews for a long time, so they pretty much know what we expect and what we don't expect. Anything that is even remotely suspect, we pretty much take pictures of. If Josh or the salesperson isn't there, they're pretty much going to send a picture out to a handful of us, and then we're going to make the call right there on the spot. There have been times before where we've seen a piece of plywood that like had some moisture issues, but the plywood wasn't compromised. It didn't need to be replaced. Sometimes we'll make the call, like, do we want to just go ahead and replace it? Do we want to, is it fine to leave in place? Yeah, we'll make a note of it. If it doesn't need to be replaced, we don't have to charge that extra money to the homeowner. But yeah, there's multiple people that have the ability to make that decision. So,
okay. All right. Once the inspection's completed and anything that needed to be replaced has been replaced, what is the next step in the process?
So then you're going to start installing your leak barrier. You're going to do drip edge along the eaves, which is basically anywhere where you're supposed to have gutters is the eave of the roof. So you're going to go and you're going to install your drip edge along all the eaves. And then you're going to go around and you're going to start installing your leak barrier, or some people call it ice and water shield. That's going to go along your eaves, your valleys, all around all of your penetrations. It's going to go along the rakes or the gables. It's going to go along your ridges, along your hips. So once all that's in place, then you'll go in with your underlayment. And then after underlayment, then you'll go through and you'll do your starter strip, and then you can start installing shingles.
Okay.
So that part goes relatively quickly. Yeah, that's the easy part. And I think most guys will agree. That's the easy part.
Where does flashing or the ridge cap come in the process? Or is flashing part of the underlayment process? Or
yes and no. So with the ice and water or the leak barrier installation, we'll already have, again, us specifically, we replace flashing on every single job pretty much. So we'll already have like the siding removed in order to remove the old flashing.
okay.
So we'll do ice and water up the walls around any of the areas that have siding. We'll do basically the step flashing and the end wall flashing. That stuff is all that gets installed like while we're doing the shingles. It's kind of, it's called layered in there.
Okay.
So as we're doing the shingles, we're doing the step flashing, we're doing the end wall flashing. And then once all that's said and done, then the siding will all get put back in place. For ridge vent, ridge vent and cap shingles are pretty much the last thing that we do. So, all your pipe collars, all your box vents and all that stuff, again, it's all kind of like interwoven into the shingle installation part. Once you get your shingles done, then you're going to go in and you'll put in your ridge vent, and then you'll cover the ridge vent with your cap shingles, your ridge cap shingles. So ridge cap shingles are pretty much the last thing we do, usually while one or two guys, or depending on the roof, one or two guys are doing the cap shingles. You usually have the guys that are cleaning out the gutters for the debris and granules that have fallen into the gutters over the day. They're taking all the leftover materials off the roof. They're cleaning up the ground. They're wiping anything down. any exposed nails or anything like that needs to be touched, they're going to go ahead and caulk that while we're up there. Usually by the time that they're putting on the last couple of cap shingles, for the most part, they're done. They're almost completely cleaned up. And then they'll go around, they'll do their final inspection, final walk around, pictures, and all that jazz.
Typically, how long does a roof replacement like what you just described, how long does that take our crew?
Almost every roof that we do is 1 day. In the rare case that we get kind of a larger than average roof, a day and a half, it is very, very rare to have a roof that takes more than 2 days, especially with shingles. It would have to be an extremely large roof to take more than 2 days. Yeah, we may only run across that once or twice a year for shingles. Some of the higher end roofing, like standing seam or cedar shake, Da Vinci tile, Brava tile, stuff like that, those are kind of more intricate details, a much slower. The install for them is very, very time consuming and specific. So that takes a lot more time. An average cedar roof could take a week. Standing seam roof could take a week. Da Vinci tile, Brava tile, all those things could take a week. That's probably a normal job for those. So
it amazes me that, talking about asphalt shingle roofs, that you can make that significant of a difference and an impact in your house within, 12 hours or so. There's not very many other projects like that make that kind of impact.
Well, it's scary. The roof is like the first line of defense for your home. So it's like being a cop and taking your bulletproof vest off for an entire shift.
True, you don't want to.
It's the first line of defense. It's not something you want to take, a long time. So when we take that roof off, our goal is to get your home back and protect it as quickly as you possibly can, while also maintaining, proper installation and quality standards.
Sure.
So you put enough guys on a project and you get into a rhythm and a system with your crew, where pretty much every roof 1 day is all you really need.
Yeah. Listener, we did our very first episode, season 1, was all about roofs. And so if you have more questions about different materials, really everything, even down to how much a typical roof might cost, go back and listen to episode 1. Aaron mentioned that we'll send, our crews will send pictures out to a handful of people. We did an episode on Company Cam, which is a software that we use every single day. You can go back and watch that. We had a special guest on that day. Anything else, Aaron, that you're like really itching to share about roof installation?
No, it's, okay. I mean, so it's, it may or may not be boring to the listener. We do it every single day. I still love what I do, but it's rather routine, and some days can be very, very boring. We love to install something that's not asphalt shingles because it is the market leader for products. So no, I think that's, I probably oversimplified it, or maybe it sounds complicated to some people when I discuss it. It's all just routine for us. So,
as somebody who, I have a front row seat to what our crews do daily, but I don't have the expertise, and so it's anything but routine. So it's cool that you're able to make it seem that simple. I would be remiss. The Ravens play in 2 days, and they're playing the Bills. So I'm going to have to say go Ravens. I know that we're kind of a state divided. There's a lot of Eagles fans, a lot of Ravens fans.
Yeah.
But I'm saying let's go Ravens.
Don't forget the Commanders.
They're gone, man. They're lost. They're out.
They're done?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Go Sports.
Yeah.
Go Sports.
All right. Aaron, thanks for your time. I'll see you next week. That is all we have for you today on the You Ask the Pros Answer podcast. Hey, would you help us to continue to get the word out about the show? The best way to do this is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media, or simply tell a friend. And before we go, we want to hear from you. This show does not exist without your questions. if you have a question for Aaron, you certainly probably don't want to ask me the question. You can send it to info@askproexteriors. And if you could put "you ask" in the subject line. If you are facing an upcoming home project, we hope this episode has empowered you to tackle it with confidence. Remember, knowledge is power, and a little bit of research can go a long way. Until next time, happy homeowning. The You Ask, the Pros Answer podcast is produced in-house by the Pro Exteriors team. Pro Exteriors is the exterior contracting division of Empire Construction Group, LLC. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. For more answers to your questions, please subscribe to this channel and podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Do you have an upcoming home remodeling project? Find more answers to your questions at askproexteriors.com.